Hi everyone,
Hi,
welcome to the
hi
webinar.
everyone.
Yeah,
Bonjour.
bonjour tout le monde. If you please could make sure that your microphones are down, pas ouverts,
Off.
ça serait très gentil. Comment?
Off.
Off, thank you. Yeah, and Nolwenn, if you ever hear me, if you want to make sure that everyone has our microphone turned down, you can do it by yourself too. I'm also doing it. Okay, everyone, it's already 12. We're gonna start. We're gonna, give a bit of grace and start maybe in 30 seconds. So please just take your time to sit down, grab your favorite beverage, water, coffee, tea, and we'll
I
start in
see some
approximately.
names.
You see some names that you know?
Yeah.
Oh, good. We're really happy to see you all. It's such a it was such a webinar that we were waiting for to introduce Fanny thesis. Again, I'm just giving a bit of time, but we'll start in 20, 30 seconds, something. So everyone can enter the chat. And if it's not already done, please just take your microphone off to make sure that there is no sound from outside. Okay. We only have 1 hour, so let's get it started. Hi everyone, bienvenue dans le webinaire. Welcome to this only webinar in English of our season 2025-2026. I am Marie-Ève. I am at communication at the CMHA Montreal branch. And just before introducing our guest today, I just want to make sure that we understand the mission of the Montreal branch CMHA, which is to promote mental health and act in prevention within the Montreal communities. This is why webinars are so important to us. And we also are a bilingual organization. And this is our only webinar in English for this season. And it was important to us to have a bilingual offer because it is part of our mission to promote mental health, not just in one community, which would be the French community, but various communities. And we also think that it reflects the multicultural background of Montreal. So for everyone that is coming in, this is how this will work. We have 3 blocks for this webinar. The first block, we will be introducing the thesis of Fanny. The second block, we will be talking about gender perspective and intersectionality. And for the third block, we'll be talking about social media and women's mental health. Within those 3 blocks, we'll have 5 minutes periods where you can ask questions. So you can always ask them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and talk to us and just ask the questions. You can also ask any questions in French. Vous pouvez toujours demander les questions en français, il n'y a aucun problème. Moi et Fanny, on parle très bien les 2 langues. Donc, n'hésitez surtout pas à poser des questions en français, c'est tout à fait accueilli. So without further, notice, I'll introduce Fanny and read literally your bio. Fanny is passionate about communication, research, and education with a strong interest in women's mental health and social media. Fanny holds a PhD in communication studies from Concordia University. Her academic practice and expertise in mental health is strongly informed by her experiential knowledge. As part of her work at the CMHA Montreal branch, Fanny brings her social commitment to the service of individual and collective mental health, working to reduce inequalities in access to care. Convinced that mental health is a fundamental right, she develops and supports inclusive and tailored initiatives to meet the needs of the most vulnerable populations and promote well-being. And I do have to say and add that it is an honor to be working with Fanny for the past 6 months, and she is part of our team. So let's get it started. Fanny, do you think I forgot something about your bio? Would you like to add something?
No, thank you so much, Marie-Ève, and hi everyone. I see some names I recognize in the people attending, so I'm happy about that. And I'm happy to be diving back into my research. I have to say it was a very strange feeling to open my dissertation again, because I finished writing it quite like at the same time last year. So it's the first time that I was really opening it again especially given the time that passed, it's always a strange feeling. If people have done something like that, maybe like written a book or written a thesis or a dissertation, they probably know the feeling.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for, again, diving again in your thesis 1 year later to literally narrow it down within an hour webinar format. Thank you very much for doing that. So let's just start with the basic, right? Could you briefly introduce your thesis and how, and like what led you to focus your research on women's mental health?
Sure.
Yeah.
So for those of you who may not, but probably don't know about my research, I mean, I don't have this. There's a
Oopsie.
mic that's open. So I did my my PhD on women's mental health, especially on how women use Instagram as a way to take care of their mental health. So I use this site of study to really make sense of women's mental health and the barriers that they encounter, and also try to understand the social phenomenon that became quite something around the 2019, I would say, which some media platforms called Instagram therapy. There were even articles on my research that labeled it as Instagram therapy, but you will see that it's not really that. What led me to research that is, of course, my own experience as a woman living with. So I had a depression phase during my life. I also live with generalized anxiety disorder. So it's something that is personal to me. I have my own experiential knowledge of mental illness, of living with it. But also, I am myself an active user of Instagram. And this is how I came to know about these communities and want to make sense of them. So I started my PhD in 2017. I was studying something completely different at the time. I was actually looking at images of violence against marginalized populations that were circulating online, and that led me to spaces online, especially on Instagram and other more visual platforms, where people were actually trying to take care of themselves in the face of seeing so much violence circulating online. There was also the Me Too movement, there was Black Lives Matter, there was the Syrian refugee crisis. So all of these moments were demands and social movements were happening online, and this is the site where I saw that people were also trying to take care of themselves and use social media platforms like Instagram to also share about their experience with mental illness, for example, but other disabilities as well, like people who live with endometriosis started to go online and share about it and give you tips, but also just images that feel good. So this is how I came to this topic. And I also saw a link between how I was using Instagram myself with other practices that I had more like during my youth, but also that I could see women have as well. So things like scrapbooking, coloring, crafts like crochet or knitting. Those are all things that usually it's more women that turn to these practices, but they're also sometimes more community oriented, and there's also kind of like a shame or a sort of infantilization of these practices, as if they're not important or they're not as serious as more official ways of taking care of yourself. So this is kind of like everything that came to my mind and how I turned to this topic.
Yeah, and I think you touch a good point on talking about community, because this is also how I use Instagram. Like I really felt part of a community, and we tend to demonize a bit when we go on social media right now. It's part of our culture. But anyway, it's not just black or white, and we shouldn't be demonizing it and being like just you said, like, people that do scrapbooking and all of that. Like it's pretty nice to have a community. I guess it was something to find how to, or what methodology to use to observe those phenomena.
Definitely. And just before I dive into the methodology, it's good that you bring up the demonization, because when I started to study the phenomenon of using Instagram for mental health, especially amongst women, I found a bunch of articles that were saying how bad it is to use social media for your mental health. But none of these articles were actually asking women why they were using it and why it felt good to them, and maybe just try to understand as well, why are we turning to social media platforms which are not meant to they're not meant for care, and we also know all of the damage they can do. So why are we turning to these platforms for mental health care? So none of these they were mostly op-eds, and so none of these articles were actually considering all of the reasons and the dynamics behind these practices. So for my research, I really wanted to go and ask women and talk to women and learn more about those practices through their own stories and their own voices. So I did a qualitative study, of course, and I interviewed more than 15 women aged 22 to 49. So I did very long interviews. The interviews lasted for sometimes 2 hours. And we just talked about their social media practices. I tried to understand them. And like I said, the focus was really, the goal was really to focus on their stories, their voices, and understanding the practices through their own knowledge of it. Also because historically, people with mental illness and women living with mental illness have been very excluded from these spaces of knowledge making, not only because they couldn't access them, but also because people who live with mental illness were for a very long time considered as unable to make sense of life, of reality. And even today, there's still this idea that if you live with mental illness, your perception of reality is altered by the illness, when in fact, no one understands their experience better than someone who's in that experience. So from a lived experience perspective. So the goal is really to give voices to these women. And an interesting fact is that a lot of the women that I interviewed actually said that they felt like our conversation was therapeutic in itself. Not just because they were able to talk about their journey and talk about how they use social media, but it also helped them reflect on their own practices, maybe something they hadn't thought about. They were able to process it through the interview, but also it legitimized their practice. So a lot of them told me that for once they felt like what they were doing was not something they should be ashamed of, but it was actually helping them. So they felt very legitimized.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. You touched on it a bit about the history with women and mental health. So I feel we need to take a bit of a step back before diving into the next block, which, just to better understand our perceptions on women mental health and how it has evolved. So from your perspective, how has history shaped the way we understand women mental health?
That's an excellent question. It's really important to take into consideration that how we understand women's mental health and illness today, but also how it's treated, is deeply rooted in sexism and a long history of what we could say gendering insanity and mental illness. So this association that was made between the fact of being a woman and mental illness. And here I talk very generally about people who are assigned female at birth and who identify as women as well. But in my research, I also included anyone who is marginalized on the basis of gender. So I also had people who identified as non-binary, and also people who were queer as well. But it's so I just wanted to make that distinction. But when we talk about historically, there was really this association between being a woman and having a uterus and mental illness. So throughout history, women have been overly represented when it comes to portrayals, images, representations of mental illness, which really participated in creating this popular idea that women are naturally crazy or insane. We can think about so many different images. One that often comes to mind is I don't know if you remember those memes called the crazy girlfriend. It's like the crazy girlfriend meme. And it was all the things that women do in relationships that are supposedly crazy. But if you dig it deeper, you see that it's mostly a deep history of systemic oppression that is also deeply ingrained in heterosexual relationships, for example. So all of these images, they can be traced back as far as ancient Greece to Hippocrates. I don't know how to say it in English, so I'm going to say it like that. But the founder of medicine, who had a theory on what he called the wandering womb. So it's the idea that the uterus has a life of its own, and that it's moving freely within a woman's body and causing physical and emotional disturbances. So initially, we're just all crazy because we have a uterus, and our uterus has a life of its own, and it just wants to be it just wants to reproduce. So that's the idea.
Yeah. I was just go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, I was just gonna ask, isn't it the root of like the word hysteria?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
go
get
ahead.
there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so hysteria means it comes from the word womb in Greek. But from like this idea of the wandering room, there's really this notion that was developed, and this idea that women are inherently sick because of bodily attributes, and that our health and the condition of our health, both emotionally and physically, is linked to our reproductive organs. So this developed in many ways during the Enlightenment. And especially the development of modern medicine, this notion was really anchored through Descartes' notion of body and mind. So men were the reason and women were emotions. And during these times, it's really during these times that the male body really became the standard in terms of medicine and in terms of health, and the female body was seen as its defective counterpart. So initially, women's body were inherently defective and in need of correcting or changes compared to the male body. And from there, also, all of the studies on health that we know were founded or were centered on the male body. And well into the 19th century, while women were frequently diagnosed with hysteria, so that's where it comes from the word womb in Greek. And it was mostly a catch-all diagnosis that was used for any form of psychological and emotional conditions, but also even for physical ailments. And it also justified the forced hospitalization of women during that period. And these notions really pervaded all through the 20th century with, we can think of popular figures like Shakespeare's Ophelia, who's like laying in the water, or in the forest. There's also the Victorian madwoman, so the women writers who were, so this idea that madness was fueling their imagination, and also the hysterical woman who was hospitalized, incarcerated. And they all serve to justify gender inequalities in society as well. So the idea that women are not fit to vote, for example, or to work, but somehow they're fit enough to take care of children. But also invasive medical practices conducted on women who were forcibly hospitalized. And we can think of practices like lobotomy, hysterectomy. So those were all practices that were done on women mostly during that period. Yeah.
Yeah, you wanted to
And
add
it still continues, but I don't want to go into too much details. But basically, like if you look at history, this image really can transform throughout history. And just like shortly after that, the 1960s, 70s, there were all these movements for women's health. There was also the deinstitutionalization of mental illness, and the newly gained rights of women. So now women were in the workforce, etc. So now it was mostly that all of women's pain were mostly diagnosed as psychosomatic, and we saw also a big up in prescription of psychotropics, especially to women, so antidepressants, etc. So it's really the accumulation of these representations that really serve to pathologize and psychologize women's emotions, but also their physical health as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a pretty good painting of all the history of women's mental health. And let's keep that in perspective as we dive a bit deeper into the subject. But for now, we would have time for maybe one question about what Fanny just told us about. So if anyone has a question, you can raise your virtual hand or put it in the chat. I'll give you a few seconds. Because I know we don't type that fast, like the idea is in the head and then typing is something else. Someone has raised her hand. Would you like to? There you go.
Hi,
Merci, Myriam.
So Fanny, I just have a question. I know you mentioned doing these conversations with a lot of queer folks, but I'm wondering how much of them were also BIPOC.
I had two. So in the 15 women, I had two people who were people of color.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Myriam.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm actually going to come back to that after, because it really showed how well the perspective and use of social media is very different depending on racial identity.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, we are diving into block 2, which is about gender perspective and intersectionality. So as your research approaches mental health from a gender perspective, why was it important to analyze mental health through this lens of intersectionality and gender perspective?
Well, that's an excellent question. So it was really important to use intersectionality for this project, because so there's this common history and everything, but within that history are also more complex power dynamics where women were not equal when it comes to and they are still not equal when it comes to health, and also how they are perceived. So for example, for some women, especially if you look at the Victorian era, for example, for white women, sometimes madness was a way to emancipate themselves, and it also became some kind of trend to show that you are someone who's more in their heads, and women would go into these different cures to take care of their mental health, and it was seen as something trendy that these women would do, versus for if you look at the US context, for example, for Black women, that was completely different. So they didn't have the luxury of even thinking of doing these cures. And for them, it was not a trend. It was actually serving their exclusion and their oppression even more. So it's really important to consider these different dynamics even today. So women are not a homogeneous group, and they can have very different experiences when facing intersecting forms of oppression. And that's race, but it's also class, sexuality, identity, disability as well. And for example, and it's the research shows that women of color, LGBTQ plus women, but also people who are non-binary, as well as women with disabilities, they face unique stressors when it comes to marginalization and discrimination. For example, research shows that race is a major factor that plays a role in the experience of mental health and illness, and there's a clear correlation between racial discrimination and mental health struggles. And racism is also an important barrier to treatment seeking. So all of these notions are really important to take into consideration, especially when you look at how social media is used for mental health care. In my research, I found that for the people of color who I talked to, the women of color I talked to, they were turning more towards content that described their experience of racism or took that experience into consideration when it comes to their experience of mental illness. But they were also more active in sustaining these platforms. So they were doing more labor in whether it's creating a page, managing it, creating content. So they were more active. They were doing more labor versus women, white women were more easily able to connect to content that already existed, and that existed more within the norm of what's usually shared on social media, especially platforms like Instagram, where there's a lot of trendy content, visually aesthetic content. So that was also interesting in seeing who's doing the labor of managing these pages and of having to do the work to care for themselves versus those who can just connect more easily to content that's already existing.
Yeah, and have the luxury literally to just, take care more of themselves because, economically sometimes it's just easier for some of them.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Then diagnosis also comes into play. So I also had participants who had more severe diagnosis or more stigmatized diagnosis, like borderline personality disorder, for example. So they could find information online, but for them, it was also more tricky. Like some of them didn't want to openly talk about it. So they would just look at content, maybe take screenshots, but they wouldn't engage with it because they just didn't want either their friends or family to see that they were interacting with this content, or even the platform to know that they were interacting with it. So that was also interesting to see.
Thank you. That leads me to the third question. Actually, I'm just going to skip one because we're already touching about the subject of intersectionality. We did have a question that was, how do factors such as, we're talking about it, race, culture, social context, economical context, mental health, diagnosis, intersect with gender to shape people's mental health experience? How does that intersect?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit like what I said. So what I previously said. So it's like the more factors, the more risk factors you have, the more you will face barriers, or you will be more prone to maybe develop a mental illness. But of course, mental health and illness are multidimensional. So it's not just one factor, but the more you have factors involved, the more likely you are to experience. And the data shows it as well. So the CMHA National actually did a survey in 2024 on mental health in Canada, and they showed that, and the survey showed that women across Canada, especially women who identify as Indigenous or LGBTQ, were more likely to struggle with their mental health and to face a lack of care. And overall, women also reported a higher rate of poor mental health and anxiety and depression than men. So the data shows it, but also the way we're socialized makes it that women talk more openly about mental health than men. So sometimes is that we can ask ourselves if that's the reason why the numbers are so high, maybe. But still, we can see that there are so many factors that play into why women have a higher rate of poor mental health than men, and there's many data that shows it, but overall, there's also a lot of factors that play into it. So like hormonal changes, gender-specific experiences such as caregiving roles, domestic and sexual violence, gender-based discrimination. Women are also disproportionately affected by various forms of violence, including domestic abuse, sexual violence, emotional abuse as well, which can lead to PTSD, anxiety disorder, depression. And we can also talk about everything that's societal, social expectations and gender roles, so which can increase stress, especially. So women are often expected to balance multiple roles, all the while adhering to cultural ideas of beauty. And so these pressures can really be exhausting. They can lead to low self-esteem and even to burnout. So all of these things really come into play. And then when you add other determinants of health like race, economics, everything, all of that, you will see that the more women are poor, the more they're exposed to these risks, for example, or like depending on your cultural identity, the norms are going to be different as well. But then, so there's all of these dynamics that come into play.
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot was said. There is so many things to take in consideration. Not that you talk too much or anything. It's just so much to think about and to remember. And what stood up for me, and what I remember at least, is that data is backing up this. You know, it's not just a feeling. It's not just like, am I crazy about thinking about intersectionality and how mental health is maybe, you know, experienced differently in the women's community. Like, data is backing it up. So thank you so much for like all of this. I don't know how to say it, but like painting. Thank you. Would you like to add anything else about? I think you did touch it a lot about like the differentiation in between genders. Is there anything you would like to add before we move on?
Maybe just add one last thing, is that like it's important for me. It's very important to look at mental health from a gender perspective, not necessarily because women's health is more important than other gender identity, but in their specificity. So as much as men's mental health is also important, but it will be for different reasons. And for example, my study would have looked completely different if I looked at how men use social media for mental health, because it's very different. And also there's a lot of research that shows how when women look for information on mental health or any kind of health, it will be more various, I guess, like it versus men, it will be a lot of it will easily fall into right-wing politics and things like that. So it's very different ecosystems and very different type of content, but they're equally important. It's just that's why gender is so important to look at when it comes to mental health. But also it's important when it comes to women's health to take into consideration that we still live in a system where we are not equal yet. So when it comes to health, it has to be a different, we have to look at it from different perspective, because we haven't achieved equality yet.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah, that was a good add to all of the talk. Thank you. We have a 5-minute period of question, a real 5 minutes. So maybe we can take on more than one questions. If anyone wants to write a question in the chat, I can look at it. I have an eye on the chat, or if you want to raise your virtual hand and talk, you are more than welcome to do it. I'll also just give you the time to do it, or to think about your question. I'm not afraid of silence. Not anymore. No, I just know that sometimes it takes time,
And we can also take questions at the end. So
yeah, absolutely. So you can
it's
still
like
reflect.
if a question pops up while we're talking, you can also write it in the chat and we can answer at the end.
Absolutely. I'll give it a 20-second more, just in case, because questions from you are really important.
Il y a une question.
Une question. Est-ce que la
Vas-y.
recherche est disponible? C'est en français. Est-ce que la recherche est disponible?
Oui,
Merci.
la recherche est disponible. Je vais répondre en français si la question est en français. Ma thèse est disponible en accès libre, je pense bien. Je pense qu'il suffit de chercher mon nom dans Google, mais sinon, on peut peut-être essayer de la trouver puis mettre le lien.
Ouais.
Sinon, j'ai aussi un article dans Feminist Media Studies en anglais qui est en accès libre également.
Yep.
Ainsi que plusieurs articles dans la presse. Si on cherche mon nom, Fanny Gravel-Patry, ça devrait être accessible. Mais oui, c'est accessible.
Et merci. Merci. On va essayer de trouver le lien, en effet, pour pouvoir vous le donner quand on va vous envoyer le courriel après le webinaire. Absolument.
Oui, bonne idée. On peut faire ça.
Amazing. Is it anyone having another question? Valentine, maybe? The sound is on. I'll cut off the sound, just so you know.
C'est peut-être une erreur.
Yeah, okay. Well, keep your questions then, and we'll move forward to the block 3, which I was excited to get into. We have more than 3 questions in that one. Block 3 is about social media and women's mental health. So do social media serve as a source of mental health support, or can it also be a risk factor?
I think that's the question I get asked the most when I talk about my research. So an important nuance to make from the start is that the objective of my research project was not to find whether social media platforms like Instagram were good or bad for mental health. I really wanted to look at the social phenomenon. So and when we say look at Caroline found my
Thank you,
dissertation
Caroline.
in the chat. Perfect. Merci. And so when we look at social media, so it's basically to look at social media as a social determinant of health, basically. And a lot of researchers are starting to see social media as a new social determinant of health that can be both a risk factor, but also a protective factor, depending on how you use it. But also, we need to take into consideration that social media is an environment in itself. So within any kind of environment, there will be sets of norms, there will be rules, there will be modalities, there will be power structures as well. So all of these things are present in every environment in which we live. So if we can take, for example, the workplace, because that's an environment that we talk about a lot now when it comes to mental health, and how we need to protect workers from the psychosocial risks of the workplace, but also how the workplace can favor a good mental health and how it can be a protective factor in the lives of people. So the way I see social media is similar. The difference is that social media are managed by big companies that don't necessarily have the best interests, and it's not the same dynamics as the workplace, of course. So it's very specific rules and dynamics that need to be taken into account, and I do that within my dissertation. It's a bit complex to talk about it now, but it's to take into account the different layers of power that make social media possible and make it exist. But the thing with social media is that a lot of it depends on people. So it depends on people sharing. It depends on how you use the platform, and a lot of the norms, the rules, even the modalities of the platforms depend on people's use of it. So there's a form of agency in how we can negotiate our use of social media. But I think to compare it to compare it or to say that it's a social determinant of health is a good way to understand it, and also to understand it as being an environment in itself, and also in order to make changes, to make calls to our governments to protect users, for example. This is also helping if we look at social media as an environment, as something that we exist in, versus just an entity that comes and attack our mental health. Or I don't know, there was a recent study, or I think it's like a rapport that was published in the EU, that actually concluded that social media was responsible for a young girl's mental health struggles.
Yeah, heard. Yeah.
Which is, I think, important to take into account, because there are many ways that social media can be detrimental, but it's not the only story, and it's also not the only factor that plays into it, because social media is also a reflection of society. So a lot of the problems that we see on social media are already present in society, but they might be blown out of proportion, extended. So this is also important to consider. So the answer is that it's not good or bad, but it's an environment. We need to consider all of the elements that compose it.
And I really love that new, I mean, for me, it's new, that new definition and perspective on how it's a space, it's an environment. Because I think personally, like, I would see an online space as something that is not real. It's out of the world. And then maybe I don't consider it as important. And there's like kind of a dichotomy in between the real world and the internet world. But it is as important, like you said, it's a social determinant. But I guess I personally forget about it because it doesn't feel real, but it is a social determinant. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
And it's very much real, because how it makes us feel, the things that we do with it, they are all interconnected to our physical material lives. So it's not disconnected. It's an online space, but it's a space. So and especially when we talk about disabilities or illnesses, or in this case mental health and illness, it's also important to consider the bad it can do, but also the good it can do, because and we will see also, we will dive into that, I think, in the next question, but it's also important to consider that it can provide some form of relief.
Yeah, not just all black and white, for sure. Okay, yeah, well, let's jump into the next question then. What were the main findings of your research and what stood out the most for you during your research?
So I tried to summarize as best as I could.
Yeah.
But the main finding really of my research is that Instagram is, so I said it's a space, but it's not just a space where women go to find representation of what it looks like to live with mental illness. Because when we think of Instagram, which is a visual platform, we will think about it as somewhere where we look for representations. But it's part of a larger continuum of mental health practices that have a great influence on their experience of mental illness more largely. So I found that how they use the platform was very much connected to other practices that they had for their mental health, other treatments as well that they were going through, but also very connected to their material lives, like we said. So I think this is the most important finding of my dissertation. And one of the main arguments I make is that women use Instagram to sustain complex modes of care that can be empowering, but they can also so they can be empowered by the platform, these practices, but it can also be constrained by the platform. So I also considered how the platform could hinder their practices. So I didn't only consider the positive, I also considered how it could impact or maybe be something that was in the way.
Do you
so I
yeah, do you have any examples? Because I'm trying to think about examples of like a good way of using social media and a bad way to use it. Any examples you can
I think
share?
it really depends from one person to another. And again, this is really something I try to refrain from doing in my research, which is really hard because like when you do interviews, what's hard is not to project your own assumptions into what others are doing. So I really tried to see, okay, that feels good to her. And then try to make a portrait of that. Because again, my goal was not to say if it's bad or not. I also did my research in communication studies. I don't study psychology. It would have been very different maybe if I followed these women through a treatment to see really if like their use of social media was really beneficial or not. So this is not what I pretend to do at all. So I really refrain from categorizing as good or bad. But what I can say, however, is that what I found is that my participants had a very in-depth knowledge of the cultural codes and the technological functioning of the platform. And this is what enabled them to really use it to their advantage. So for example, one of my participants really used the aesthetic dimension of the app to strategically share messages about her own eating disorder recovery. So she used images that were very appealing, very like nice colors, etc., because she knew that the more appealing the images would be, the more the platform would share it, so push the images, but also the more people would look at them. On the other hand, I talked earlier about people who live with borderline personality disorder. I had one participant who completely preferred to stay anonymous. So she did not share anything. She just searched for information on the platform. And then she chose this information, and then she would discuss it in therapy with her therapist. So that's another way that is completely different. So you can see how it really depends on the person and how they decide to use it, they decide to use the platform.
Yeah, these are good examples. Thank you. We do have really good questions in the chat. So I'm gonna smash two questions together that I know are really important for you. So it was about like if someone is listening today and feels overwhelmed by the impact of social medias on their mental health, I'll take it in two parts. What advice would you offer them And afterward, can you talk quickly about like if your research revealed any reasons for hope around social media?
Thank you. So if you're struggling or questioning your use of social media, I think it's really it comes down to what feels good to you and what's important to you. So one thing about, so a lot of like the usual advice that you're going to hear is take a break, get off social media, which is a good advice. So it could be that, just take a step back. But if you're questioning maybe the kind of content that you're using, well, I think what's important is the content that you're following really aligned with the person you want to become, with your values, and this is how you can also assess what feels good to you or not. So I think it's a very personal analysis that you have to make with yourself on the content that you engage with, and also make how do you say, like un tri? I don't know how to say that in English, but you have to just like go through the things, that pages you follow, and just unfollow. Yeah, do a clean of your social media is a good way to do it as well. But I think it's a very reflective exercise that you have to do often, to question what you do with social media and if it makes you feel good or not. And in terms of hope, so there's a lot that I didn't cover that that also
such a short time.
That I was also able to cover in my dissertation. But what I found is that the communities that women were able to find on social media, and the feeling of not being alone. So this idea that there are other people who go through the similar experiences. There's also hope. So a lot of my participants talked about the hope that they felt when they saw people who had similar diagnosis or experiences, who were further along, for example, in their healing journey. It gives them hope. And for me, that's what's hopeful, is that for like a very long time, people did not have communities that they could relate to, especially when it comes to mental illness. So it's really a first to know that there are people out there who have similar experiences, and also like the way people connect on Instagram is not like, the women I talked to, they said they didn't need to speak to other users or to engage with them. Just seeing their post just was enough for them to feel like they were not alone, which can be really helpful when you're going through a difficult phase where it's difficult to socialize. Just knowing that there are others out there who have similar experiences. And also for women, it's a space where we can have a better understanding of our bodies and our minds. I had one participant who lives with premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So it's an illness that touches women, about people with the uterus. And it's thanks to Instagram that she was able to find out about it, and to know that this is what she was experiencing. And there's still little research on it for the reasons I talked about. So the fact that there is still so much to know about women's bodies. So it's also a way to make sense of our bodies and understand our bodies and our minds, because there's not enough studies in traditional medicine. And it's also a way I think looking at these practices is also a way to improve mental health care in general and services by including the people concerned. So instead of just seeing social media as bad, looking at it from the perspective of how people use it and why, I think is very important if we want to make changes in the long term.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I did feel like it too. Like I did turn to social medias from time to time to like discover more about my own mental health, for example, or my own physical health. That was really helpful. That's a good point. We are almost at the end, but we have 2 good questions in the chat. So if we ever want to nail it down in like a 1 minute, maybe if we can, we'll try. So Madeleine is asking, do you have any recommendations, ideas on how parents should approach the use of social media with their teenage daughters?
That's an excellent question. I think listen to them, ask them about it, try to understand from their perspective instead of just shaming their use or saying it's a problem or even just pointing something and saying it's bad. Have a conversation, ask them about it, ask them the why, how it makes them feel. I think it's the most important thing, to really listen to them and find solutions together. If really their use of social media is a problem, have an open conversation about it with them and try not to be judgmental about it as well.
Thank you. That's great advice. Yeah, conversation is always the first way to go for sure.
Yeah.
We do have another question that I really like. It is, what do you think about it is from Reina. What do you think about the compelling effect social media has to stay on YouTube? You know, you have to stay on YouTube or Instagram longer than we should, or to keep scrolling even though we want to stop scrolling, which happens to me all the time. And we know we should be doing something else, like resting. Oh, I love the resting part. Yeah.
Sure. Well, that's like one of the risks associated to social media that is obviously a problem. And I think it's really important to acknowledge it and to take it into account. And most of the women I talk to were very conscious of that aspect as well. And one thing that I found really interesting is that a lot of them would screenshot a post when it's interesting to them and look at it afterwards, or like write in their journal, like use the post as like a writing prompt in their journal, or so the screenshot kind of became a way to pause the never-ending algorithm that we all know is not good for our mental health, and then to reflect afterwards. So that's like one technique that came out from the interviews that I found really interesting. But I think it's a problem that we need to take into account, and also to make demands to social media platforms or to our politicians to ask for changes or for better technology, because like I said, it is an environment and we exist in it as much as we exist in our workplace, in our house, in our families. And it's not going to go away, so we have to
it's not. No, we have to live with it. No, for sure. Well, thank you very much. This does end the webinar today on, I'll say the title again, Women's Mental Health and Gender Disparities in Health. Stay with us just a bit. I do invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, because the Mental Health Week is coming from the 4th to the 10th of May, and we are about to show the programming, and the first people that will know about it is in the newsletter. So it is not announced yet, but you will have access to other webinars like this one in particular with Place des Arts. We also have one for anxiety that is coming up in that week. We also have short movies projections, and we will be offering actually the PSSM training, which is Mental Health First Ed. It is an 8-hour training that we give for free. There is only 25 places, so please subscribe to the newsletter if that ever interests you. This webinar will also be accessible on YouTube, probably by tomorrow, along with all the other webinars of the season. And if you've gained new perspective today and you want to share it with a colleague or a friend, please do so. And subscribe to our YouTube. It always helps to gain visibility and promote more mental health. And last but not least, we have a survey that you can please do if you want. It's just 5-6 questions, takes less than 1 minute, but it helps us to narrow down which days, which hours, if the webinar was interesting and all of that. A lot of, you don't have to answer any question. It's just like task, so that's it. Yeah. Thank you very much again, everyone, for being here with us. We do appreciate that you showed up live. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Pour votre écoute.